So good morning, everyone. I'm switching tax here. Definitely, Dr. Holpike's presentation is hard to follow. Um, my paper looks at the effects of country level conditions on research and development transfer, and I specifically took the entrepreneur's perspective on this. So. Basically, the main finding of my research was that country level conditions influence R&D transference outcomes. And it is not so much the mechanisms that support entrepreneurships that are helpful for R&D transfer, but it's rather the broader national context that matters more. And my findings challenge this idea of one size fits all approach to innovation transfer in the context of entrepreneurship. So the extant knowledge has found basic things about R&D transfer, specifically for the small businesses, and the fact that it depends on internal aspects of the organization, things like linkages that a company may have, resources, and also it depends on external factors such as subsidies from the government or FDI availability. One of the key research gaps that I have found is that there wasn't any cross-country analysis that also incorporated the entrepreneurial perceptions on these factors. So the purpose of my study was to test whether the factors supporting entrepreneurship, things like digitization, government policies, make a difference on the extent of R&D transfer when considered together and in their overall impact at the country level. So the main literature insights that I found is, of course, that knowledge spillovers and cooperation increase R&D transfer. Things like internal capabilities that organizations have, like tech and marketing, are critical for leveraging R&D. Institutional quality and policies, of course, as external factors influence the outcomes of R&D. And finally, digital readiness entrepreneurship programs available in a country tend to boost R&D commercialization. So my methods were a little different. I took data that's already available from the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor. They have a number of surveys from which they collected primary data from entrepreneurs. This is the National Expert Survey, and the most recent data available is the 2021. And I was able to collect over 1,000 observations. 50 countries are represented in the data set. My statistical models were factorial ANOVAs, and I used 3 different models. One considered the dependent variable, excuse me, I should move back, excuse me. One considered the dependent variable of R&D transference, and this represented the extent to which R&D leads to new commercial opportunities. And the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor provides standardized scores for that variable. And my independent variables for the first model were country, simply as location, and fostering factors for entrepreneurship in general. My second model, same dependent variable, but now I considered country and recommendations that entrepreneurs have made in terms of what they believed would support their entrepreneurial activities. And the third model considered the independent variables of country, again as location, and pandemic actions that the government took, because this survey data corresponded to a time of the pandemic, and it was a good experiment to see if government intervention made a difference on R&D transference. So in terms of the descriptive statistics, I could already see what the entrepreneurs were saying. They basically said that the top fostering factor for entrepreneurship in their countries were government policies. Government policies also came up as the top recommendations for improving the entrepreneurship support. And of course, the pandemic policies did impact entrepreneurship in general. The negative perceived policies were those tied to the lockdowns, and the positive policies were tied to financial support. But When I ran my model, I found that there was quite a bit of disconnect between perception and reality, and I found that the broader national context would matter more. So my models showed that the country level effects are consistently significant across the three models. Country, in fact, explained 30 to 47% of variance in R&D transference. So what I have found is that entrepreneurship supportive factors show no significant impact. And also the pandemic related, so any kind of government intervention policies, they were not significant. So that led me to believe that it's really the country context, not so much the entrepreneurial context in the country, that makes a difference when it comes to R&D transfer. What this means for policymakers, it means that they should probably focus on some context-sensitive strategies that are tailored to national environments, that those one-size-fits-all entrepreneurial supporting activities are not as important as supporting the overall national environment, and there are some context sensitivity to the national location. It is also possible that policymakers should do better by doing direct interventions for R&D commercializations and rethinking the reliance on broad entrepreneurship support mechanism and focusing more directly on the R&D transfer and support. The lessons from the pandemic is, of course, that we need to build resilient and adaptive innovation policy and act directly on innovation rather than trying to support just entrepreneurial activities in general. For entrepreneurs, it meant that country location was important. So here we see some indications that we need to prioritize countries that have very strong R&D transfer infrastructure. Seeking some targeting R&D commercialization opportunities might be indicated because now we don't necessarily need to rely just on entrepreneurial support, but there might be some opportunities that are general in that economy that we should be paying attention to. Finally, because there are some differences across the countries, it may make sense to form international partnerships with those other organizations that are maybe in high transference locations, and to evaluate location strategy beyond the ease of doing business and as a small business, but looking more specifically at how the entire economic system supports R&D transfer. Where we can take this research in the future, we can look to study the mechanisms of R&D transfer, things like tech transfer offices, innovation hubs, IP regimes, that we could develop new R&D transfer metrics. There might be something in the cultural dimension, so maybe the Hofstede's framework might bring in some light because we did find that, in fact, the country makes a difference. What is it about a country that impacts R&D transfer? Finally, because countries are different in terms of how they support R&D transfer, it might make sense to explore cross-border incubators, mobility programs, and there might be some differences across the sectors, and there might be some long-term policies that my research was not able to evaluate because the data was a one snapshot in time. So here we see the main conclusion. National context overshadows traditional entrepreneurship factors when it comes to R&D transfer. A good innovation environment, it's good for companies of any size. General entrepreneurship support mechanisms are insufficient to support R&D transfer, but good national level support strategies might work well. Policymakers, therefore, must target innovation-specific interventions, operate directly on the R&D transfer rather than trying to generally support entrepreneurship in their country. And finally, their one-size-fits-all innovation policy does not always work. So thank you for listening. I hope you found this research as interesting as I did. I thought I was very fortunate to be able to look at the voice of the entrepreneurship and find some data that was specifically based on their perception. Thank you.